Laury Haytayan provides an overview of the energy crisis triggered by the U.S.-Iran war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which has removed 20 million barrels of daily oil supply and a fifth of global LNG from the market. Gulf states are scrambling for alternative export routes, while the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa are gaining strategic importance as transit and supply alternatives. Paradoxically, the crisis may accelerate the green transition as energy-importing countries increasingly see renewables, electricity interconnectors, and hydrogen projects as long-term shields against supply shocks, with Europe in particular looking to the Mediterranean as a more reliable alternative to both Russian gas and U.S. LNG.
So when the war started on 28 February between the U.S. And Iran, basically the president of the United States was saying this is going to be a very short war. He was talking about 4, 5, 6 weeks max. And so the markets reacted based on that assumption that this is a short-lived war. And on top of that, the war, as we know, had started on the basis of the U.S. wants to put an end to the nuclear ambitions of Iran on the ballistic missile projects and on the proxies or Iran's support to non-state actors in the Middle East. So that was the agenda of the war, or these were like what the war wanted to achieve: to put an end to the nuclear, to the ballistic, and to the support to non-state actors. But soon with the start of the war, this has changed and it became like really a war of opening the Strait of Hormuz. So very soon, or like very at the beginning, so it became now a crisis, an energy crisis. And this energy crisis is not only impacting the producing countries in the Gulf, but it is impacting everyone on all continents: Asia, Europe, even in the Americas, and of course, Africa. So what we are seeing basically is with the Strait of Hormuz closed, that means that 20 million barrels of crude oil and byproducts are stuck. They cannot go into the market. And 1/5 of the global LNG consumption is stuck in the strait and cannot go to the market. And this has created automatically an increase in prices of oil from $70 before the war to what we are seeing these days, around $110 for the barrel. And definitely we've seen the same increase in the LNG prices and gas prices, sometimes using 60% in Europe or more, 40 or 60% or more in Asia. And then definitely, so it became this crisis. And how to really get out of this crisis, there are no alternatives to finding alternatives to 20 million barrels of crude and byproduct, or 1/5 of LNG being cut from the market. So even if the natural inclination for the countries and for the companies were like to go to the US, definitely we're seeing an increase in the US production and export capacities. Same, we're seeing it in producers in Africa. We are seeing an increase in production in producers in North Africa. Yes, this is happening, but it doesn't mean that they can close the gap and fill all the gap that has been left by the Strait of Hormuz, which means that countries now need to look at short-term alternatives and solutions so that there is no violent impact on their economies, but they need to think as well about the longer-term implications of this war and longer-term solutions to avoid these sorts of shocks. Definitely, we've seen like these shocks, energy shocks, are becoming more and more frequent than just like ad hoc. So these are the thinking that are happening today around the world about short-term solutions and long-term sustainable solutions. So what we are seeing currently is like to say a bit about the Gulf before moving on to the Mediterranean or to Europe, where we're interested in, at least. So the Gulf today is thinking about, okay, how to bypass Hormuz. And that's very important to them. Today, the only two countries are Saudi Arabia using its pipeline, which is the East-West pipeline that goes from the Arab Gulf into the Red Sea. It is being able to use that pipeline to export, and this is saving the economy of Saudi Arabia. Same for the UAE, which is using its infrastructure in Fujairah, which is beyond, and it bypasses Hormuz. But the rest of the countries, except Oman, which is completely out of the Strait of Hormuz, other countries are suffering, finding ways to export their oil or their gas. And this is an important issue for these countries because they do live on revenues coming from this oil and gas, which means that this is an existential crisis for them. So what we are like hearing and seeing, and to be seen, because like what will happen after the crisis. But today the thinking is like, okay, how can we find new routes and how can we build new infrastructure that will bypass Hormuz? And this is where we are seeing these talks about new pipelines, new corridors, so that these producers from the GCC can get their oil and gas out of the strait, without the strait, or even if the strait is opened with conditions, they would have alternatives. So the alternative routes is by working more on common infrastructure in the GCC to be able to get out of to get their oil out. At the same time, what we are seeing, like interestingly, that definitely the Red Sea is again like one solution. Therefore, the importance of securing the free passage in the Red Sea is becoming even more and more a priority. At the same time, we've seen with Iraq that they've used the Mediterranean route, and we've seen that they use trucks to export their oil from Syria into using the ports and infrastructure of Syria into the European market, and it could be other markets as well. So this is where the importance of kind of the Mediterranean is coming back, and sort of the Eastern Mediterranean, and linking it to these diversification projects that the GCC is thinking of to add up to what already was happening, which was the IMEC project, which was initially to link India to the Middle East and through the Mediterranean into Europe. This crisis might be enforcing kind of and pushing more forward the Mediterranean to play a role, and for the projects like IMEC to be more important and critical and seen as a national security and energy security projects, more than just like trade projects as they were seen before, or just connectivity projects. Now we're adding to it this security dimension, energy security, trade security, all of that. So the Eastern Mediterranean should be able to make that pitch to be able to secure all of these connectivity projects as part of the diversification projects and energy security and national security projects. So this is what basically we are seeing. At the same time, if you want to go to the Western Mediterranean or North Africa, so basically what we've seen that North Africa currently had been kind of, especially Algeria, the country to go to seek short-term solutions, which is like, please, if you can, increase capacities so that Europe can import the gas coming from Algeria. We're seeing the same now with Libya and investments really rushing into more of oil or gas in Libya. And this is something that we haven't seen before. It was picking up. And I believe now with this crisis, there will be more interest in investing in mature countries where they already have oil and gas, so that because this is faster for the short to medium term possibilities to cater to the needs of Europe, the short term needs of increasing gas, at least gas for their needs. At the same time, what we might see as well, we might see countries like Qatar wanting to invest outside their own jurisdiction and outside their own oil fields, to invest in fields like in the Eastern Mediterranean, where then they would have kind of to diversify even their portfolio, not only like investing in the US, but investing as well in closer markets to Asia, because Asia is the main market for the Gulf oil and gas. So the Eastern Mediterranean could be that place that we see interest. And we've already seen interest in Syria. Qatar Energy announced like a partnership with Total Energy and ConocoPhillips, the American company, in partnership, of course, with the Syrian oil company, to start exploring gas fields or oil fields in the Syrian EEZ. So these are like the way forward we might think about oil and gas, thinking about diversification of routes, at the same time diversification of investments in places outside the GCC, so that there would be some kind of availability of supply whenever there might be shocks like the one we've seen, especially that no one is like, there is a bit of uncertainty around how this crisis will end in Hormuz and what sort of framework will be put in Hormuz. Because today the Iranians are setting up their own rules on Hormuz, setting up a new mechanism for passage where you would go through the passage set by the Iranian authorities, paying some fees for the services, all of that, which I don't think like most of the countries in the GCC will accept it, or even internationally that would be something acceptable, because if Iran does it, then other countries and other places will feel that, okay, why not do the same, and then restrict all these free passages that were like part of the free trade schemes put internationally. So that's kind of what we are seeing. So looking forward, I think one question is always remaining, okay, investing in these diversification of routes, diversification of supply, but at the same time, what is the future? Is this the right way to think about the future, especially for the European countries? And with European countries, kind of it has impact as well on the Mediterranean, or at least in the North Africa and to some extent East Mediterranean as well. It's about like, will this crisis kind of help the green agenda, or on the contrary, it will stop it or kind of slow down the pace of the green agenda? Already before this war, we had some sense of the political direction, especially in the US and in other places. It's like kind of like putting the green agenda on hold, or not seeing such enthusiasm about the green agenda. But I think today with this Hormuz crisis, it could be that maybe it is the push needed to continue with the green transition. And let me explain why. When you see, and to simplify the things, not to complicate them, when Qatar announced that they cannot supply the market and they had to stop exporting because of the attacks that they got into their facilities, and then because Hormuz was closed. So that had created a major crisis on those who do use LNG, liquefied natural gas. So the Asian market was affected. and automatically we've seen as well the European market affected. And by that, even though Europe was getting out of the winter season, so we were not that much in need of the gas, but automatically there was that panic mode of, okay, now we might be having a deja vu of 2022, where we as Europeans will have to compete with the Asians over these LNGs coming from the US or other places, and then we'll have to pay high cost to get the LNG, because for LNG is like whoever pays the most gets it from the market, besides all the other contractual agreements. But there are these tankers or the LNG ships that go to those who pay the highest price for it, and that would be additional cost to the EU. So when you have these sort of shocks, and then every time you have to pay the price of these shocks, billions of dollars. Currently, the Commission is saying that this current crisis has cost already like around 26, 27 billion euros because of the crisis in general. So that's a lot of stress on the finances of the European states. So in this case, what would you do? Like in Asia, some countries were switching back to coal to provide electricity to their people and to keep the lights on. And in Europe, it's like it is diversified, definitely. But what do you think about it? What do you do? So then I would believe that the result would, the thinking would be, okay, wherever we can, let's increase the deployment of renewables. And again, just to talk about like switching from this LNG crisis or the gas crisis that we're seeing into something that could prevent us from this volatility and from the supply shock. And then we secure like affordable electricity. So to go into a more deployment of renewables as an energy security a solution to what we're seeing, because it's not fair that if Russia has problems with Ukraine, they go to war, and then people in Asia suffer from that. It's not fair that if US has a problem with Iran, they go to war, it's people who are in Asia or in Europe suffer from that. So this is the thinking of the countries, especially importing countries. So those who are importing energy for their economies, they're thinking now, okay, our renewables are the solution to prevent us from these shocks. So instead of every time paying this high cost for these shocks to supply ourselves very expensive oil or gas, so let's invest that money into more sustainable solutions. And this is where renewable would be the solution, and we would see a kind of more investment in that. So on that, I think what we would be seeing that, okay, let's do more renewables, let's do more clean energy for our systems, for our energy systems, for electricity, all of that. It's where at the same, so Europe will be thinking about, like, of course, inland solutions, but of course, working as well with the Mediterranean, southern Mediterranean countries. And this is where I would see that there would be more investment into electricity interconnectors, because basically that all the ideas about the electricity interconnectors being the Great Sea interconnector between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, or the other project from Egypt to Greece, all of these projects are becoming now more and more interesting because, again, it is linked to the security of energy supply. So it's not just about climate pledges, it's more about the energy supply and energy security issues. So that I would see more attention to that and more investment into that. And definitely one other solution that might be more investment and accelerating the hydrogen projects. Again, we know that the Mediterranean countries, at least North African countries like Algeria and Tunisia, they do have projects with the Italians and the Germans about securing hydrogen into Europe. So that project as well might be interesting to invest in as a very as the safety and security measures, so that to invest in that. So what we could see is that the direct implications of this war could be, yes, continue investing in already existing oil and gas projects, especially in North Africa, to supply the European market with gas that is still needing for it, but at the same time looking into more of this investment into electricity interconnectors, and then third could be hydrogen. So this is how I see, like, strategically the Europeans would be thinking about, like, the future, their future, and the sustainable solutions to what they're facing today. And the same, I think, for the Mediterranean countries, they would look into this collaboration with the Europeans and how they can benefit from more investment into their clean energy agendas. And for those who already have their projects on gas, I think they will go forward, because it is becoming more important as well. Because yes, there is like a reduction in demand for gas in Europe, but it's not that we're seeing this fast reduction. Still, the European market needs the gas, and especially that even when they're facing the worst crisis, one of the historically, like, a big crisis, but they haven't changed their policies on completely cutting off their import from Russia. So they are still continuing on their plans to, by 2027, end of 2027, completely stop importing gas, which means that they would need to find the alternative to that gas. And I think today they don't want as well to end up relying on LNG coming from the US, because at the same time as well, they see that President Trump is not the trustworthy ally for them. And then it could be weaponized as well. So they want to diversify. And the closest, cheapest could be the Mediterranean, and especially the projects that are already working, and the projects that are almost going to start. And third could be like new projects, if there might be some interest regionally inside the Mediterranean, or in some markets as well in Europe. We might see that, but definitely more investment in electricity interconnectors, third, hydrogen. And I think I will stop there.